I said that whilst I'm here in the chair for you.
All right. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. This is the London Bitcoin space. It's a space for learning, networking, and of course contemplating Bitcoin and shitting on shitcoins as well, if you wish. Before we start, just so you're aware, there's a camera filming Margot. She's okay with that, but we're not going to get anyone else's face on camera. We hope you will kind of share the same consideration to others and not take any photos or videos of anyone who doesn't want to be snapped. We are really lucky to have Margot with us tonight. Margot is one of the leading voices in the Bitcoin community, championing the environmental, social, progressive case for Bitcoin. She's doing her PhD at the University of Georgia Tech. It's not a university, it's just Georgia Tech.
It's the Georgia Institute of Technology, but we call it Georgia Tech for short.
They call it Georgia Tech? It's Georgia Tech, yeah?
Yeah.
And Margot's actually part of the Occupy movement, which was the kind of predecessor to the launch of Bitcoin. And she's now a member of the Bitcoin Policy Institute in America. She's come straight from Edinburgh to be with us tonight. So we're extremely lucky to have her. So please welcome Margot Paez.
All right, well, can people in the back hear me? Yeah? All right, good. So, yes, I'm Margot. I'm also Jin Urso on Twitter, so you may know me maybe as Jin Urso. I have kind of a controversial position on Bitcoin because I actually think Bitcoin can help us with regard to climate change, and so that tends to trigger people on different sides. Those who think climate change is a hoax and those who think Bitcoin is a scam that's melting the planet. So it's really interesting to be in this position, and I share it with a few other people like Troy Cross. But I think because I come from an activist background, I was part of Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion and organized my own climate protests in Georgia, I tend to get a little more heat than other people in the space. So, but it's interesting. So anyway, I'm also a fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and there I do research at the intersection of Bitcoin, energy, and the environment. Recently, we wrote a paper for the White House. They were seeking submissions, and they were interested in hearing about anything about Bitcoin and about cryptocurrencies in general and the environmental impact. So we wrote up a paper that looked at the social value, and when I say we, I mean Troy Cross and I. We put this paper together. It was 10 pages, very dense. The first half being all about the social value of Bitcoin, the second half being all about the environmental benefits and the potentials of environmental benefits of Bitcoin. And I think this turned out to be a really big success because this particular Office of Science and Technology under the Biden administration actually read what we wrote and reached out to us. And there were key points in their final report that actually reflected some of our own findings, which is that Bitcoin mining in particular could be useful for incentivizing the buildup of renewable energy, and that also it can be useful for stabilizing an electrical grid that has a high penetration of renewable energy, which is something that we see in Texas in the electrical grid there. So they have like 20% of their power comes from wind, yes. And so a lot of the mining operations are located in those regions. And because there is a lot of wind being produced at the same time, there's an excess of power, and that has an effect on the prices, on market prices. So basically, Bitcoin mining is useful for taking that excess power and monetizing it, which is good for the developers. So anyway, that's one of the things. The other thing that we found that was a potential benefit to the planet was that you could mine on methane. And by doing that with a particular type of source of methane, whether it's venting or flared methane, you could actually potentially reduce the methane emission impact on the atmosphere. And so right now we're trying to quantify that. there's Daniel Batten, who's been doing some preliminary back of the envelope calculations that look very promising. Like if we could actually theoretically scale out Bitcoin mining on wasted or flared or vented methane from fossil fuel sources, we could potentially reduce future impact by about like 0.5 degrees Celsius of warming. So that's pretty significant. But that's a very hypothetical thing, right? We don't know yet. So one of the things that I'm doing, I'm working with a couple of people in the space, one being Harold Rauter, and the other, her name is Marissa Coriello. And we're currently doing a life cycle assessment on methane mining, and we're looking at different ways that you can do it. So not just with fossil fuels, but also with landfill waste. So we're looking at landfills, we're looking at vented, we're looking at flared, we're looking at biogas, which is another really interesting possibility. And we're trying to see, okay, really, what are the emissions over time, and is this really a net benefit to the planet, and can we really do something to bring down those emissions? Because of all of the pieces in this story of what Bitcoin could potentially do for us, the methane one is particularly important because we are starting to see that methane in the atmosphere is taking longer to break down. And it's not exactly certain why. We have some suspicions of what might be happening. And we think now, and when I say we scientists who have been doing the research, that it could be that there's these hydroxyl radicals in the atmosphere that are usually they are attracted to methane, excuse me, and they react and ultimately they oxidize and convert it into other products, with the end being carbon dioxide. But there's another compound, which is carbon monoxide, which is becoming more prevalent in the atmosphere due to mega fires that are being fueled by increased global warming. And those are more attracted to these hydroxyl radicals. So, excuse me, so that means that the methane is not breaking down as fast. So we don't want to end up in a feedback loop where we're getting more methane in the atmosphere. Excuse me. Well, I haven't spoken this loud in a while. Yeah, and so we don't want that methane feedback loop to happen because that will accelerate the warming. So if Bitcoin mining can really be an emission reducer by converting methane into CO2 and doing it in such a way that it is really reducing the warming and not over its whole life cycle, end up being, emissions positive, then we could actually make a dent in this problem. And why Bitcoin, why not any other possible solution? Well, the reality is that all other possible solutions require a lot of cooperation, a lot of players, whether it's political leaders or corporations like the fossil fuel companies, to come together and agree to reduce these emissions. And the reality is that we don't live in a world where that is really possible or very easy to do within the short time frame that we have to try to keep these emissions low. So Bitcoin, in many ways, is designed for a world that is not based off of cooperation or trust, right? When I engage with somebody else and I buy something from them, or I sell, you give me dollars for your Bitcoin or whatever, I don't have to trust you, right? That's part of the beauty of the network itself. And it's interesting, or it's cool, it's a nice feature that actually expands out into all aspects of the network, including mining. So you can do something that is good for everyone and yourself, right? So there are not a lot of tools that we have out there that allow you to make a selfish choice that is also beneficial to other people. So that's why I think Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining in particular is really useful when trying to deal with the climate crisis. The other thing is not on the mining side, and then the big reason why I ended up here today is because I realized that the financial system is really at the core of our problem with dealing with climate change. So climate change is really a symptom of a root problem, which is our economic system and economic growth. And so long as you have this drive for economic growth, you're going to have a drive for environmental degradation and environmental destruction. So that's just pretty, I mean, maybe it doesn't sound obvious, but it is really obvious, because in order to create more, you have to consume more resources, right? So you have to find a balance. And when it comes with the financial system that we have and fiat money system, there's no limit on what you can do. And that is a problem for a world that is built off of the laws of physics, where there are real limits. So having a monetary system that is tied to the physical world is really, really important, and is something that I think we as society need to get back to. And we have gone so far away from that, and we have completely financialized our economic system, where we're really disconnected from our environment. So all aspects of our lives have to reconnect with the real world, and one aspect of that has to be the money, because that is the foundation of our economic system and foundation of trade. So for me, when I put these two together and I realized, oh yeah, wow, okay, so the banks are really bad. I knew that from Occupy, but then I realized, oh, they're not only bad for people, where they're foreclosing on homes and they're causing financial meltdowns and then getting bailed out. No, not only that, they're also in bed with fossil fuel industry, and they're funding all of that. I mean, Jamie Dimon recently has been really critical of the energy transition, which is really at its very beginning stages. And it just shows, that these banks are not on the side of people. They're really on the side of whatever they want for themselves, which is really profits. And I think that for me, that's not a system that I want to be part of. So one of my beliefs with Bitcoin is that we should have the ability to opt out of a system that doesn't work for us. And I think that Bitcoin is a great way to do that. It's the only system that I know of, only monetary system that I know of that works today, that works in a way where I could do that right now. So because Bitcoin is the only tool that we have where you can really financially opt out, it seems obvious to me that we should put all of our efforts into making Bitcoin work for everyone and anyone, and to get as many people on board to be able to make that transition out of a really toxic economic system and into something that we have like a ground floor entry into shaping and creating a new world for ourselves. So that's very utopian and romantic, and but the reality is it's messy. But at the same time, we're already seeing that in the global south. We're already seeing that happen, where circular economies are being created in small communities, whether it's in South Africa or El Salvador, in the Philippines, Guatemala. These places, these circular economies are sprouting up all over the place, and I think that's really exciting, and it speaks to really to what Bitcoin really is, right? It's a lifeboat for people when they need it, and in particular in these regions, people need a good money. They need money that isn't going to be inflated away, or that could be stolen from them by authoritarians or dictators. So it's really exciting to see this happen, to build out there, and I'm hoping that if I can convince more climate activists, especially the ones who are really into degrowth, that they could see that they could actually create the kind of world that they're trying to build, which is one that is really very much aligned with the Bitcoin philosophy. Like in Bitcoin, we talk a lot about low time preference versus high time preference, and which is just like saying, you're willing to wait for things, have patience, not everything fast consumer, spend, waste, buying crap that you don't really need, that kind of mentality. And that's also very much aligned with climate activists who are promoting degrowth, right? They want a slower economy, a more human-centered economy. They want more local economies. So localism is also a big part of the Bitcoin philosophy, the Bitcoin ethos. Permaculture gets talked a lot in the Bitcoin space, right? That's also part of degrowth, right? People are really, I think everybody, I can't say everybody, but I think a lot of people these days are feeling this need to try to get back to that kind of life, a little bit slower paced life, a little more, a life where we can, spend time with each other more than just being caught up in the rat race. So I think that there's so much overlap. So if I could get climate activists on board, then I really think that we might actually be able to do something, really do something with Bitcoin in the sense of being able to use the power of this movement, because the climate movement is very, very strong, and there's a lot of really committed people. And if they were to really understand Bitcoin, I think they would just run with it and really make it something more than I could even imagine. And so I would really like to see that happen, because I think Bitcoin really needs to be a tool that people use, not just a tool, not just an investment, right? I think that if Bitcoin only is an investment for some rich people, then I think it's completely failed in its mission. So it's my hope that we can get more activists using Bitcoin, along with the people who are using it in the global south, who really need it in their day-to-day lives, and that Bitcoin could really grow into be something really powerful and really special. So that's really what drives me to work in this space and to go after all of the FUD and try to kill all the FUD as much as possible, and to do the research that I'm doing, because I have a lot to prove to a certain group of people about Bitcoin and what it can do. Maybe not to any of you here, but people especially in the climate movement, I do have a lot to prove. They're very nervous about it, but I think that we can do it. It just takes work. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you, and I'm hoping that we can keep working on this and keep working on building out Bitcoin and getting it to reach its full potential. So that's just a little bit about me and what I'm doing, and how I ended up here was because I cared about climate change and also Bitcoin. So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions, or if you want to post a, yeah.
Just what's your view on the situation with Greenpeace at the moment? Because they clearly don't get it.
Oh yeah.
Funded by XRP or
yeah. They're not on our good side right now. No, it's really bad. Their change the code thing is ridiculous. Yeah, and the thing is that they're hypocrites, because here they are. They're an organization that claims that they don't take money from corporations or whatever. But they take like a couple of million from Chris Larsen, 5 million from Chris Larsen, who runs XRP, which is this altcoin that wants to basically be the network between the big banks, right? And it's just like, and then there's another climate group right now that's just announced that they're going to take Ethereum, and I just feel like, people, what are you doing? The banks are the problem. But you're helping them, because like Ethereum, JP Morgan Chase is heavily involved in backing Ethereum. There's something called the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, and you can just look and see there's several banks backing that whole thing. And that is not going to help us. It's not going to help the climate movement. Proof of stake, is not going to help the climate movement. And then, Greenpeace taking money from the guy who runs this
shitcoin.
this shitcoin that is just for the big banks. That's not going to help. But they don't seem to be able to piece these two things together, which I think is a problem, and I think is going to be a problem for the climate movement until they get to that realization that, oh, yeah, we have to, if we really want system change, then we really need to completely change the financial system. And then I ask, okay, so what other tool out there do you have to change the financial system? There's only one, Bitcoin.
And are these guys your climate guys that you want to convince, essentially? Are these the people that you want to convince?
Yeah.
These other guys, who back proof of stake?
I'm sorry?
Are these the people that you would like to convince? You said you're Greenpeace and the other organisations that back
Yeah.
stake.
Yeah.
You said you would like to get some of your climate friends on board.
Yeah.
Are these the types of friends that you're referring to?
Yes, because the reason why they go to proof of stake is because they think it's low emissions, and so they're just hearing, okay, this is not going to melt the planet because it's not producing CO2, but they don't understand, like, oh, okay, wait, there's a reason why, we had this sudden run up in CO2 emissions that also coincidentally coincides with the 1970s and onward, right? So that's not a coincidence, right? There's something there happening that is tied to the way our financial system works and economic growth. Yes.
You mentioned trust. Doesn't community and trust go together?
Yes, but
At the beginning, you said that Bitcoin, you could do exchange with people you don't trust. So isn't that a contradiction?
no, because there's different levels, right? There's in the community, in a small community where you know people, it's you have trust built in, right? Because if we were a community of people, we lived in the same town, we would know each other, we would know what we're doing, our everyday lives, we know where our community leaders are, etc. And so you don't need to worry about whether whatever deal you make with somebody else is going to go through or not, right? So that's okay. So that's fine. But as you scale up, and we have to, and I'm talking about something like climate change or the financial system, which is a scaled up system, it's a global system. When you get to that level of globalization, your ability to know and trust each other becomes very, very diminished. And so you're working, you have groups of people who are forming alliances with each other, or it's just like any war you see, right? World War II, the axis of evil, whatever, the allies, right? So you have this like game theory where you have groups, and how do you get these groups to cooperate with each other when they're not part of the same community, right? Every each nation is kind of like their own community. So in that sense, you need to be able to operate without having to trust the other group. And Bitcoin, that's why it's really important, especially when we're talking about climate change, because the problem is that you have various groups, which are really various countries. Some countries are more responsible historically for all of the carbon emissions in the atmosphere than other countries. And basically, the global north is responsible historically, and now we have China and India, and Japan as well. But then the global south is not responsible for all those emissions, and they're saying, well, what are you going to do? You guys owe us something, because we're also, not only are we not responsible, we're also the first ones to feel the impact of climate change. So how do you get something like the United States, which is home to some of the biggest and worst polluting corporations in the world, to come around and say, yeah, we're gonna throw money at you. We're gonna altruistically stop polluting the planet so that you guys don't die, right? That's the kind of problem that we have, right? You have to basically get people to do what is right without them having to just to do it because it's the right thing to do. And we're not we don't have a lot of tools to get political leaders and countries and et cetera to play in a game like that.
How do you see the future? Local or global or both?
I think both. I think like I would love to see like more localized communities, but that are globally connected. And I think also, again, Bitcoin is great for that as a money that it can be a global borderless money, but that is also can be used at the local level. And there's different ways in which you could do that, like especially if you wanted like your own complementary currencies, you could do that. Yeah.
Yeah, just to go back to the topic of trust. So essentially how the current system works is you have third-party recourse for insurance, you hire professionals to verify a transaction, essentially. Bitcoin, it removes those intermediaries. You don't need them because the ledger, the blockchain, is publicly verifiable by all. So if you have a transaction between two parties, you will be able to say, okay, the transaction has taken place. You do not need a third party solicitor, etc., etc. There's mutable, because it's immutable. Whatever's happened there is recorded in all time for everyone to see and verify. So it removes that trust element, because I, you, she, her, him, the guy in the back are able to determine whether or not that transaction took place, whether value flowed between the two participants without the need of hiring a solicitor or etc., etc. So that's how it moves trust on a larger level, because everyone can verify if something happened or not.
But I thought the speaker said that you didn't need trust.
Well, you don't need trust. That's exactly it.
How can that be more trust if we don't need trust?
You don't need trust. It's trust don't don't trust, verify. That's it, simply.
I wonder, Margot, if perhaps this issue of where the energy comes from, I know it's quite a politically hot topic at the moment. I wonder what your stance is in terms of if someone's mining Bitcoin with renewables, obviously great, but if people are mining Bitcoin with non-renewables, how do we kind of reconcile that?
Yeah, so
It's not economically viable.
yeah, it's not, from my perspective, it's not great, but it depends also on how you're sourcing those fossil fuels. Like when we're talking about flared or vented, if it was something that was already going to be put out into the atmosphere, then, and let's say like, for example, vented, it pretty much is not combusted methane. So it's just methane that's going straight into the atmosphere. And so that's, methane is 84 times more potent when it comes to warming over 20 years compared to carbon dioxide, and about 27 times more potent than carbon dioxide over 100 years. So, you know, if you can hook up basically a generator that combusts it efficiently, and you monetize that with Bitcoin mining, then on the end, you're just, instead of taxing the atmosphere, which I touched on, which has its own reactions that try to break down methane into carbon dioxide, rather than taxing those tools that the atmosphere has, if you just combust it on the ground and release that CO2, at least what you're doing is you're reducing the immediate warming potential of that vented methane, and you're also allowing society to have a little bit more time to deal with the warming that is happening. So in that sense, you know, it's like, okay, it's better than it just going into the atmosphere. But that, of course, like the best solution is that you should just not be venting at all, right? But that requires policymakers and to pass laws, like actual laws that don't have loopholes, and a reduction in fossil fuel production, and that's a lot harder, and that takes time. So in that sense, okay, it's better than just doing nothing. But then there's been situations where miners have co-located with a natural gas plant or a coal plant. And of course, I personally don't like that. I don't think that, I think it gives the network a really bad reputation when miners do that. And I know that the reason why they do that is because they just don't care, or they don't really think climate change is a serious issue. So they're just trying to maximize profits. So it seems like there's been a period for mining that has allowed for this kind of high time preference, or like short-term profit maximization thinking amongst the mining industry. But I have a feeling that that's going to change, and we'll see less of that kind of mining in the future for a couple of reasons. One, I mean, coal is just becoming more expensive, at least in the Western world. The other thing is that the mechanics of the protocol itself, that as the hash rate goes up and the block reward goes down, you have an industry that had already been operating at the margins of profit, having an even more competitive time. So you're really going to be pushing miners into much more creative situations for mining, where they're going to have to recapture their heat and sell it. They're going to have to be using more and more waste like biogas, which we're starting to see happen. So I think that we're still, there's going to be a period where we see this happening here and there. But the overall trend is going to be towards serious wasted energy. In Guatemala, they're actually using used cooking oil. They're going around and collecting cooking oil from restaurants, and they're mining it. And they're doing that because they want to raise money for the community. Their goal is to repair this waste treatment plant in the town and then mine with the biogas from that waste treatment plant. And then all of that will be to support their local Bitcoin circular economy. And this is all happening from the grassroots. So that's what I think is going to happen. I don't like seeing it. I don't like seeing fossil fuels being used, because it just makes my life harder when I'm trying to convince people that Bitcoin has all this potential, and then they're like, oh yeah, well, what about this coal plant, or what about this natural gas plant? The other thing, though, that they miss in that story is that the reason why these plants are attracted to Bitcoin is because they're struggling, and they are responsible for a lot of tax revenue in the cities or towns where they're located. And so not just tax revenue, but also jobs. So what I've found in looking at some of these coal plants is that, and even natural gas plant, is that the communities actually want this to happen because they need this money. A lot of this tax revenue goes to the local community, to like the schools. So there's a couple of places that I saw, like in Hardin, Montana, and in Greenwich, New York. I mean, well, Greenwich, the natural gas plant, which is in upstate New York, around Seneca Lake, where basically, like, whatever the tax revenue you get, a portion was going to the local school district. And in Hardin, for example, the coal plant had been struggling so much that it had not paid taxes for like 4 years. So when they made this partnership with Beowulf and Marathon to do mining, they were going to bring in all sorts of tax revenue, and not only that, it was going to help a local First Nation where that coal is sourced. So it's really complicated, right? And this is not just unique to Bitcoin either. This is a just transition problem that is happening all over the place, and that is not really recognized enough by politicians, where you have to realize that if you're going to do an energy transition, you still have to find a way to support the communities that were built around the old energy sources. And that's not always taken into consideration. And environmentalists don't always look at that either, because sometimes they're just so focused on we gotta shut down these plants, we gotta reduce these emissions. They're not thinking about what that means for the people in the community who are working at these coal plants, or who were benefiting because of the tax revenue and how that was supporting the local schools. There's a lot that's missing if you don't look at the economics. So in that sense, I think Bitcoin has been good, and at least bringing that to the surface. I just don't, but I don't think enough reporters have really tried to look into it enough, though. But that is really part of the problem with these Bitcoin mining co-locating with fossil fuel plants, at least in the United States. I mean, outside of the U.S., it's a little different, I think, because it depends on the country's energy mix. So, and in that case, I mean, well, what can I do, right? Like, if Kazakhstan is all coal plants, I mean, I don't know I can't stop Kazakhstan from, having coal mining, right? So I can only deal with what is in my own country. Yeah.
So you've mentioned, you've given a few examples of fossil fuels which are being used, or at least you're looking into using more creatively and less environmentally damaging, as well as renewables. Are there examples outside of those that like you could share with us that where there's research and how that can aid the whole Bitcoin mining?
Okay, so do you want examples of it actually happening now, or?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned solar. I'm aware of solar, but I guess I'm just looking to see what's the bigger picture out there. What's the groundswell of maybe the research that you're looking at, and kind of what's happening, what's bubbling under.
Okay, so
different energy sources.
With renewables.
Different stranded energy sources. Right, outside of the not typical wind, solar,
yeah, so there's
waves, whatever.
yeah, so for example, there's a company called Biomining that is mining with pig waste in Mexico, and that's really cool. There's Vespine Energy that is right now that has gone through a round of fundraising from, I guess, investors, venture capitalists, and they are looking at landfills all around the United States. And they want to mine on those landfills. Now, the mining with Bitcoin on those landfills is not really the end goal of what they're doing, but it's to jumpstart the project. And ultimately, what they want to do is create a distributed network of power charging stations. And it just happens that landfills tend to be all along some of the major highways in the United States. So if you can fund and monetize the build out of that infrastructure using Bitcoin mining, that will make it a lot easier for that network of car chargers basically to be built out, and to build out that future that we need for electric vehicles to have lots of charging stations, because it does take time to charge them. So that's their goal. So they're working on a pilot, I think in California, where they have a landfill that they've selected, and they're going to set up their equipment and whatever it takes to get the methane out of the landfill, and then they're going to mine with that. Let's see what else. There's some biomining going on a farm in Ireland. So like farms, basically, waste treatment plants, landfills, sugar cane. I think. I'm sorry?
Geothermal.
Yeah, there's geothermal, but there's also, I think in Madeira, in Portugal, they were asking about whether they could mine using sugar cane. So, people are getting creative, I think. So I think that we will continue to see really creative ideas come about how to source from waste.
Are all banks bad?
What type of bank?
Well, the bank's bad.
Oh, well, I'm my own bank, so I guess I'm okay.
Bank, she said.
Sorry?
I'm my own bank, so I guess I'm good.
Same.
Yeah.
So there's a Dutch bank called Triodos, which is, has anyone heard of Triodos? They invest in environmental projects, and their headquarters in the UK is in Bristol.
Mm-hmm.
And I called up about having an account, and I found their customer service particularly bad.
My customer service is great.
Are you with Triodos?
I'm sorry.
You're not with Triodos? Are you with Triodos?
Triodos?
No.
She's her own bank.
I don't think
Your
customer
own
service
bank.
is going to say
Fair enough. And then I've been at Lloyd's, and Lloyd's are not angels, right? Let's be honest. I've been with Lloyd's since I was 19 because Barclays pissed me off, and my dad was a businessman and he was with Barclays and got me a super savers account back in whenever. So I moved to Lloyd's because I got really pissed off with Barclays, and they've been pretty good. Customer service very good. So what I'm trying to say is that the world is complex, and it's just not black and white. They're grey. Areas of grey. That's my point.
Well, sure. I mean, the world is not black and white. There's complexities, but I think that if you really look in, and I'm talking about the big major banks, and I used to bank with HSBC, and I can tell you that the number of times that I've called and I've told them, I've said, you work for a bank that money launders for cartels, right? Because they do. And some years ago, the United States Senate had a hearing about that, and hey, HSBC is still operating today, so I guess it was no big deal, right? So
Banks print money, you can't print more Bitcoin. That's
For the government prints.
Yeah, central bank.
No, so actually, like with the dollar in the United States, I think about 5 to 10% of it is actually like literally printed by the Treasury, and the remaining, I don't know, 95% or 90% of it is actually created through credit creation by the private banking industry. So most of the money that we use is just debt. It's debt money. It's IOUs. It's just stuff. It's just stuff that the banks created through loans, and your deposit is like a loan to the bank. So
why this pint was like £6. 5 years ago, it was £1. That's the reason.
Could I ask a question about methane? You quoted a range of its potency versus CO2 for greenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard everything from 10 to 80 times. Why is there such a range, and how do you calculate the relationship? Yeah,
it depends. So this is called the greenhouse warming potential. So it's basically what this figure is to try to give you a sense of what these other greenhouse warming emissions are like comparable to carbon dioxide. So when I say 84 times more potent over 20 years, that means that I'm looking over a specific range, because it takes a certain amount of time for the atmosphere to break down methane. So over 20 years, there's still a lot of methane in the atmosphere. So just the chemical makeup of methane versus CO2, the molecular bonds, they can reflect way more heat than let's say CO2. But then over a 100-year period, a lot of that methane is broken down, but it's not all yet completely CO2. So there are other byproducts that are still in the atmosphere that are greenhouse gas warming, and so those still make them more potent than CO2. So that's why you'll hear these different numbers. Usually, I think people will give the 100-year number, which is like about 27 times, but it's you'll hear like a little bit of a range, but it's really just how it's calculated. So that's probably why. It's just really, it depends like how it was calculated and then over what time frame they're talking about. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So, question: Bitcoin's price. maybe people don't want to talk about the price, but
Doesn't matter.
it does matter. It really does matter, actually. How much do you envisage Bitcoin's price being if we are to say, if over a life cycle of a Bitcoin miner, a Bitcoin miner is carbon negative, right? And industry decides to take this on board, right? If there are no subsidies such as like carbon credits, etc., what price do you envisage Bitcoin being in order for enough players to be economically incentivized to go along that route?
Yeah, so I had a conversation with a guy named Steve Barber who thinks that coal is great, but we were talking about mining with natural gas and methane, and I asked him, because I was asking him, how realistic this is to scale this up, like what would it take? And he said that a while ago he did a calculation about like what percentage of the network could have, I forget what percentage it was, but it was like basically you would need Bitcoin's price to be about $1 million per Bitcoin, right? $1 million per Bitcoin. So this is not trivial, right? You need a lot of buy-in into the network, a lot more demand into the network. The network needs to be a lot bigger. The hash rate has to be bigger. We have to be consuming a lot more energy, really, in order to make the kind of dent that we're talking about. So this is something that has to scale up over time, over a number of years, right? So it's not something that you can just like hook up a bunch of miners right now and expect to suddenly, we're going to reduce all these emissions. I mean, of course, first of all, we have to make sure that what we're saying is correct. So that's why we're doing this study. But also, if we're certain about it, then that's when we can take those next steps and see like what does it take to actually grow the network and to grow the hash rate, and how do you source all of that, all that hardware and in order to do that. So, and then all of the funding, that is the investment that's required to do that as well. So it's not trivial, and it does require a lot more. It does require Bitcoin to become a much bigger network than it is today. Today, it's just not big enough to make the kind of dent that we're talking about.
So just to follow up on that, earlier you said, you don't want just Bitcoin to be something that people in the West invest in, but you're going to need that if you want to take Bitcoin's price to that level to be able to kind of do what you dream.
Well,
how do you marry the two together?
So, I mean, the price of Bitcoin is really set by the exchange. So if I buy Bitcoin, I take it off the exchange. I mean, I've reduced the Bitcoin in circulation, right?
It's set by the margin. So if a buyer wants to buy Bitcoin at $1 and there's a Bitcoin on the exchange for $1, then they'll buy it for $1. So it doesn't matter how much Bitcoin's on an exchange. If there's some on an exchange, whoever the market participants are, whatever price they want to buy it at, then that will be the agreed price, and that will be the price of Bitcoin, unless it's peer-to-peer and you come up with a different price for it. So the argument about how much Bitcoin being on an exchange is it doesn't really make an impact on the price, other than it's be a little bit more volatile.
No.
There are
So
less participants.
So if I'm taking more off the exchange, it doesn't really matter if you're like trying to invest, if you're just only doing investment, because we don't live in a Bitcoin standard world, right? We have all sorts of other currencies. So even if I have a lot more people taking money off of an exchange, there's still going to be times where people may want to trade back into a different currency. So I think that price demand thing will still pan out where the price can drive up. But I guess my point is like, I'm not too worried about it. If more people see the benefit of Bitcoin, they're going to want to hold Bitcoin. They're going to want to transact with it, use it as a medium exchange, maybe as a savings. I just don't. What I'm saying is, it would be an incomplete. it would be incomplete for Bitcoin if only a bunch of rich people held on to Bitcoin for the rest of their lives, and then it was somebody else's inheritance, you know? Because that's how that tends to be the narrative in the West, and I just think, you know, that's a waste of a network, of a network as special as
But
Bitcoin.
now is your time, because the hash rate is incredibly high. It means the miners have to find the cheapest form of energy to mine Bitcoin to make a profit. So surely now is a great time for you to do your work in talking to the environmentalists to find the stranded energy that miners can use to mine Bitcoin and actually still make a profit, given the hash rate is so high right now. Even like the most, you know, you need a brand new miner to kind of make profit these days, depending on the energy source.
The hash rate's only going to go higher and higher.
Yeah, that's the issue.
Yeah,
That's
well,
why I
in
spoke about
April
price.
24, you know, we're going to get the halving, which is going to make it even more challenging, but which is driving the economic argument, the environmental argument, to find cheaper forms of energy to mine Bitcoin to be able to make it economical.
The cheapest form of energy in the UK is onshore wind.
It's wind, is it?
There's a question in the back over there.
Thanks. Thank you. I've really enjoyed listening to you. It's been really interesting. Just as you're talking, I'm just thinking about the two. The Bitcoin and the climate. There's so much similarity between the two of them. They're both complex systems which rely on both positive and negative feedbacks in order to maintain dynamic equilibrium. So, for example, in Bitcoin, you've got negative feedback in like the difficulty adjustment, so it gets more difficult to mine, and then you've got the positive feedback that's happening as well, where as the network gets more adopted, and more people buy it, the price goes up, and more people buy it, and it feeds on itself. And in the climate system, you've got like positive feedback loops, like you have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, so the permafrosts melt and you get more carbon in the atmosphere, etc. And negative feedback loops as well, like for example, you might have more evaporation, which puts more water vapour in the atmosphere, and more clouds, which reflect more sunlight, and that returns to stability. So they're both these complex systems which rely on both positive and negative feedback. But interestingly as well, they're both beyond the control of the individual. Right? So the climate system, no human being can control it. In the same way, Bitcoin, no human being can control it. So I'm just curious, like, to what extent do you think that the work that you're doing by trying to persuade people to do certain behaviours actually has any influence when both of those systems are beyond human control?
Well, I mean, we've definitely have shown that we can change the climate by putting CO2 emissions. I mean, that's effectively geoengineering. I mean, we don't call it that, but basically we've geoengineered our atmosphere to get warmer. So we do have an effect on it.
Maybe I can add something else to the question then. To what extent would you argue that human beings are separate from the Earth? So, for example, do you think that humans, because we are essentially from the Earth, right? Every molecule that's in our body is carbon, which has come from the Earth, and food that we eat, which has come from the sun, and come from the carbon, which is in the ground. Are we not part of this dynamic system? In the same way that we're part of the dynamic system of Bitcoin,
Yeah.
we are part of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, yeah, like, you know, you can look at both systems as having like individual parts or, you know, simpler pieces. And we see this a lot in biology where, like, for example, well, in the research group that I used to be in, the physics department, I used to do research in physics of living systems, and we had these little robots, and they were very simple. They would just kind of flap like this, like this, and then we had many of them. And when you put them together, you would have emergent properties that would come about, like emergent behaviors, and they could do things together, and they were not necessarily communicating with each other, but just the fact that they were interacting with each other in a certain way, they would be able to do things like, let's say, they could spell out a letter, you know, they could make the form of the letter T or something. And yeah, I mean, each individual person, each organism on the planet is having an effect on the planet itself, which then has a certain emergent properties or certain emergent behaviors that come about. I mean, like for example, having certain organisms develop, single-celled organisms develop that were producing oxygen, millions and millions and millions of years ago, made it possible for us to be alive today, right? And with Bitcoin, we have nodes and networks, and then emergent properties come out of that. So yeah, I guess there's something there.
It's just interesting to like chew on and think about, isn't it? So like if we think of it as being emergent, and the two of them being almost that they sort of self-reinforce each other, and like.
What you're essentially contemplating is chaos theory. That's essentially what you're contemplating is chaos theory.
Yeah.
So just want to apply that to Bitcoin, really.
Yeah.
If a butterfly flaps is called a tornado in Texas.
Sure. I suppose the crux of my question was getting into and the reason that I asked this is because you said earlier that you were trying to sort of persuade climate activists around you to adopt Bitcoin, and I asked because of my own situation as well. I work as a teacher, so I'm doing this thing where I'm trying to, I am setting up an after-school thing where I'm getting students, 21 students that come in and I teach them about Bitcoin at school. And,
That's cute.
But it's really interesting to think about in terms of Bitcoin being this emergent and complex system like the climate as we're talking about it, and what actual impact you're truly having, if you know what I mean. It's almost like the inevitability of it. You're just kind of like becoming, it's almost like you're just surfing the wave. You're not creating the wave, you're surfing it. Do you understand what I mean?
We all are.
And we're creating the wave and we're also surfing it.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
You shouldn't just focus on global warming. You need to focus on the whole of environmental degradation. There's plastic in your bloodstream right now. There's plastic in...
What's that got to do with Bitcoin?
Well, you try to link Bitcoin and environment and this talk.
Stop consuming stuff.
Yeah, you need to reduce consumption.
Yeah.
I think have we got space for maybe one more question from the back, guys?
Can I just say something?
Yeah, right.
I'm sitting here feeling like the thickest person on the planet.
That's me every day, don't worry about it.
Yes, I feel stupid every day.
You sound like you're a professor or something or other. And all the people who've spoken just sound so,
Bitcoin does that to
intelligent.
you.
No, but also like you're really gone to universities to study all this stuff, like you're physicists and you're...
Twitter.
Twitter. I left school at 13. I left school at 13. Twitter, Bitcoin Twitter.
Wow. But anyway, the thing is that, about the environmental business, right? So when you're trying to tell people that it's the end of the world and we need to scientifically listen to what the scientists are saying, listen to it, understand it, and kind of come to some true, real conclusions about it, not sort of have some airy-fairy idea, but it doesn't matter, or it's too much for you, or whatever. But that you have to convey it in simple language, so that people can just get it, that we're in trouble. We've burned too much carbon dioxide over just a century, really. And we need to stop it. We need to change our hearts and minds and so on. Okay, something along those lines. But the Bitcoin thing, if you don't find a simpler language for somebody like me to be able to follow the conversation, how can you get out there and let millions of people get switched on to this?
It's so true.
Money talk.
It's so true.
I want to understand it.
So
I
true.
am an environmentalist, and if there is something, when
So true.
when Alistair first explained it to me, I don't know, somehow I kind of thought I had it almost. It was a bit nebulous, but I almost was there, and I thought, well, a couple more meetings and I'll have it. But I'm
That's why it's called a rabbit hole.
You
It's a
just
rabbit hole.
started.
No,
You
you
just
I just
started.
started down a rabbit hole. It's taken me 12 years. I still don't understand it. I still don't understand it.
planets will
You got.
I mean,
don't worry about the planet.
But Bitcoin is just,
billion years. No,
Big-
George Carlin will tell you. He'll be here for another 4 billion years.
No,
Don't
I'm
worry
talking
about the planet.
about humanity, but also I do want to see a change in the way the world is run, so
Yeah.
that there is equality and people
Yeah.
don't have to die from no food and this
Yeah.
and that, you know, and if Bitcoin can
It can
do
fix that.
something, and I can understand that in places like Africa, people can pick up on this and it can work for them better. However they get it simply, please try to convey it to us.
Just
Jeffrey.
to answer that,
So-
right?
I
Bitcoin
think
is
the
quite.
question was addressed to
I'm
you.
just-
later.
I'm just going to tell you now, right? Bitcoin is complex, right? But there are many different areas within Bitcoin that you can focus your attention on. And in those many different areas, you can convey a very simple message. In the financial aspect, Bitcoin is sound money. It's as simple as that.
this is not gonna know what sound money is.
But
Jin.
I had to take a class on sound money. Okay, look, have you ever been in a situation where you wanted to do something and somebody told you no, and you were like, that's not fair, why do you have a right to tell me I can't do this?
Well, that's all the time, yes.
So Bitcoin is great for people who have been in that situation from a financial perspective. So, like, for example, just really practically speaking, online, right, if I am, let's say, a sex worker and I'm trying to make money online, and which is safer than me doing it on the street, where I can do it from my home and I don't have to have a pimp or whatever, right? I'm at risk of not being able to get banking services. And I personally know sex workers who have struggled with this, where, for example, this one particular sex worker's husband got a call from the bank and was saying, you've got a prostitute who's using your bank account. And he's like, excuse me, that's my wife and she's not a prostitute, blah, 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 or like a hooker or something. It was very derogatory the way that the person said it. And a lot of people who have less than, societally accepted professions are at risk of not being able to have a bank account. And there's a wall right between them and being able to have that or being able to make money. And especially online, there's basically only 2 ways that you can make, be able to accept credit cards. It's PayPal and another company called Stripe. So if, let's say, PayPal is like, oh, I don't like your business, I'm gonna cut you out. If they cut you out, Stripe's gonna cut you out. And then you have nowhere to go to except to something called a high-risk merchant. And they want you to basically like put your firstborn down, and all this collateral. And they're gonna charge you all these high fees. So where do you turn to, right?
I'm starting to
do you know
get
the
back to where I was with Alison.
A good person to answer your question is the guy that's teaching young children. He has to find a way to articulate in a way that you
Yes.
understand, or the younger people
Yeah,
understand.
the kids understand it.
But also, it's something we're
It's
learning.
so
We're learning how
complicated.
to communicate it all the time because
Yeah.
it's a new concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was good.
It's-
depends on
it's a
the-
good way
the-
to go,
the-
because if you start to use real life situations, because like I hate insurance companies, mortgage companies, and I'm just starting to see how
They're evil.
even
They're
if we
evil.
did have to have mortgages or something like that, how you could have the power over how all that works if you try to buy a house. Or,
Yeah.
I'm sort of just
in-
give me a little inkling anyway of what's
In the
what this is about.
In the UK,
Simplify.
in the UK I'm not British, but we are. I am right now. In the UK, they've had something called friendly societies for many years, like in the 1800s, and these were basically just working class people would come together and they would put their financial resources together and they would fund things for each other, whether it was healthcare or building homes for other working class people. And that has become harder because the banking laws have changed. So it's harder to have these type of friendly societies where you can do that. I mean, so imagine a world where you didn't have these intermediaries, or where you didn't have all these powerful banks making it harder for working class people to come together through mutual aid, right? You could, with Bitcoin, you could create friendly societies. The tools are there to have like your own community bank, where you could do whatever you want with that money, and you could just save it as Bitcoin as a community, and you could recreate these friendly societies. That's something that I imagine as a practical sense of what people could do, like being able to bring back more mutual aid that has been lost. And we're really not going to be able to do that until the financial system is completely broken. So. Yeah, right? So it's getting there. And so what happens when we get to that point? What are we going to turn to? We're going to turn to Bitcoin.
Yes. Well, what about America being forced into revealing this famous gold reserve that they have locked up in Fort Knox? Does that really exist?
Gold is shitcoin.
I don't know much about all this stuff, but I do think that the money in the world is not real. And I know that because, they constantly talk about African countries being third world and all that, economies and stuff. And whilst they're talking like that, I suddenly realized, especially when there was the financial crash, but around that time you suddenly realized that the money of this first world UK is all borrowed money. So it's just an idea that because it's the UK, they can stolen and borrowed, yes. They stolen, and now they can borrow as much as they need to because they are the UK. But nothing is real. So I can get that Bitcoin is just an idea that you believe in.
Yeah.
In the same way as kind of,
yeah.
the money that we used to dealing with.
It used to be
But
backed by
without
gold.
the people in between who are taking loads of money for themselves, when you can just be direct with each other.
Yeah.
So when you say that you are your own bank, I mean, you don't have a bank account.
Oh, well, I have a bank account because I got to get my stipend somehow. But I mean, my Bitcoin is basically, tied to me. It's mine, and I manage it however way I want. And I don't call a bank company up and say, I'm going to take out this amount of money, or I'm traveling overseas, or they're not.
A bank if you own Bitcoin. You can become a bank.
So, I mean, you're responsible for your Bitcoin, right? Nobody is holding your Bitcoin. I go to the bank and I deposit money, right? They're holding my money for me, and I'm trusting that they're going to do the right thing with my money. And when I come back and I get that money back, I'm trusting that they're going to give me my money back. With Bitcoin, there's nothing like that. It's mine. I'm responsible for it. So that's why I say I'm my own bank. But I wanted to address something that you said about, it's just an idea. You're right. But all money really is just an idea. And there's this interesting thought that came from an economist named Carl Menger, who basically said money needs a community. And which is to say that there is no such thing as money without people. There's no such thing as this idea of there's no such thing as needing some kind of technology to be as a stand-in for the actual things that you're trying to trade or give to each other, right? And so if you don't have at least two people engaging, in trading something, then you don't really have a need for money. You don't have a need for this concept or this technology or this idea. So yeah, you're absolutely right. But I think that Bitcoin is a slightly different idea from the existing money that we have, and this is why I think it takes a lot of time to explain what Bitcoin is and why it matters to people who have never really engaged with it before, because you really need to understand you really have to start from the question of well, what is money? Why does this even matter? What is wrong with me carrying pounds or dollars or euros, salt. Right? Yeah, or so yeah. Why don't we use salt? Why don't we use cow skins or something, right? Bitcoin makes you go to this fundamental question of, so what is money? Why does this matter? Why should we have Bitcoin at all? What is there a problem with our existing financial system? Is there a problem with our existing money? And if there is a problem, what is the solution to that? So for people in this room, myself, I see certain problems, and I feel that Bitcoin is part of a solution to those problems in that regard. So it's a lot to explain, but all of us end up having to dig through this as we get more and more curious. You start learning, like you learn how the Federal Reserve works, or you read David Graeber's first 5,000 Years of Debt, which is a thick book, and you start learning about what debt, like from an anthropological perspective, you learn how debt was part of, all these customs between different societies, and then the evolution of money, and then how that all mixed in together. It's a lot. It's a lot. So that's why it's really hard to say in that sense, like if you really want to understand it. But that's why I think if you live in a country like, let's say, what's the country? Oh, like you live in Turkey or something where you've got hyperinflation, or you live in some country where you've experienced, well, 10% is not 100% every month on month, but if you, like in Zimbabwe, if you've ever experienced the government taking your money from you from your bank account, right? then if you've experienced that, then Bitcoin is the solution to that problem. So if you've ever been in that situation, then here's the solution so that you never have to experience that again. Because no bank, no government can take your Bitcoin away, at least if you learn how to use it correctly.
What about credit unions?
Credit unions, they're small. You can do a credit union on Bitcoin. It'd probably be cooler.
I think we're going to burn out Margaret to ask any more questions, but should we just go for one more question at the back? And then, yeah.
I thought it was a really good explanation. I definitely think that putting together what the problem is helps people to understand what the solution is.
Yes, understood.
Have an understanding of what is the problem with the money that we use in order to then start to address the solution. One thing before you go, you were saying that you were part of this consultancy group, you're consulting with the White House, you're consulting with other climate activists. I was really curious about what their general attitude is towards nuclear energy. So I was really curious about those people. I was also really curious about people in the room as well, people that are here. So perhaps if you could tell us a little bit about is it favourable, is it not favourable, how are people's attitude in the States, and then if we could maybe find a way to find out what people's opinion is of nuclear energy here, I'd be really curious to know that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and so we're a mix of different backgrounds, different education, research areas, from economics to philosophy to climate science or climate change, like myself. I'm a physicist. And then also we have different political orientations as well. Not everybody at BPI is like me, not everybody there was at Occupy or voted for Bernie Sanders. We have conservative-minded, libertarian-minded people as well. So, but in general, I think we're all in consensus that nuclear is useful, but that it is something that is not viable at least until 2027.
Oh, why 2027?
Because that's when the latest small modular reactors are going to come online the earliest, and that's optimistic. But my understanding is by 2030, then we should really start seeing more of them. So from the BPI perspective, I would say the Bitcoin Policy Institute is. The fellows are pretty much in favor of nuclear, and I know at least one of them has been working on some legislation around that, and another at his own nonprofit, they've done some research on nuclear and I don't know, some of the economics around that. For myself, I mean, I was sort of agnostic on nuclear, didn't really have a strong position either way, but was aware of a lot of the negative opinions on nuclear. So I had to really dig into that myself to really evaluate, figure out what the truth is around that. And I've really come to conclude that nuclear has gotten a really bad rep, and for good reasons early on, but that the technology itself has really developed, and the waste management isn't really as bad as people think it is. It's actually very, very easy to manage compared to other waste. And the amount of resource, like the amount of land use that you need is a lot less than other energy sources. So, nuclear? Land usage? Yeah. So, I mean, I think that it's a great tool. It makes the energy transition a lot easier. So usually what I do tell like progressive groups is that, you know, I know you don't like it, but at least don't put pressure to shut down the existing plants. At least let those continue on until the transition is over, because we need all non-fossil fuel energy sources to make it through. So that's.
Germans were a bit hasty.
People are against it because of a fear of accidents or a fear of nuclear war. What's the big reasons that people, or the main reason?
I think both. I think they do think that it's too dangerous. Like the waste is too dangerous. The radiation potential is too dangerous. Fukushima did not really help, but then it didn't really. Yeah, it didn't. No one really died from what happened there. Everyone who did perish was because of the flooding and the tsunami. So, you know, that's really hard for civil engineers to manage. But yes, but people still, there's a lot of really bad info out there around that. Like I heard I was getting my hair done, and the person cutting my hair, she was talking about like, oh yeah, the radiation in the oceans and not being able to eat the fish or something. And this was like 10 years later. So, you know, these narratives are still out there, and left environmentalists are definitely very much still, I think, you know, in general afraid, but I'm seeing that there is a change in the narrative. I'm seeing a lot more people on that side of the spectrum coming around, I think mainly because of how dire the situation is, and they're just realizing, okay, maybe we need to at least accept the current, maybe we shouldn't shut down all the plants we have right now, because this is really challenging what we're trying to do.
Should we just get a show of hands for pro-nuclear? If we want to see that, who's pro-nuclear? And who's not pro-nuclear?
I know you said last question. Can I follow up on
Final
that?
point, yeah.
I'm halfway through Alex Epstein's book, Fossil Future, and his narrative is basically that, like, you know, nuclear power seems to be like that goal that you said, and that will still take time, maybe 10 years from now. And from what I'm getting from the book is that, you know, the argument seems to be get there as like, let's use as much energy as possible to get people out of poverty, to get like, to get to that position where nuclear can be the most viable position. Are you, from an environmental point of view, and you're obviously the scientist, are you saying that like we need to stop that really urgently and can't go through the next 10 years of that transition to getting potentially something like nuclear, and we need to like really stop on the carbon emission side before that, and we can't just continue doing what we're doing now? Is that what you're saying?
Epstein is arguing for business as usual, which I think is suicidal, and it's not going to bring anybody out of poverty. It'll actually kill those people who he's claiming will bring them out of poverty, because they're the ones living in the global south, and they're the ones who are going to be facing the worst and already facing the worst effects of climate change. So I think he's completely incorrect in what he's arguing. I also think that he's overlooking the fact that there's not a lot of, like, for example, he gives an example at the beginning of the book about, I don't know, somewhere, how was it, like in Uganda or something, some hospital, which is that he claims that, oh, you know, without these fossil fuels, we couldn't have saved all these lives. But the thing is that energy independence for the African continent, for the people, is not going to come from fossil fuels because most of the countries there don't have strong fossil fuel resources. But they've got a lot of sun and they've got a lot of water. There's lots of hydro potential there and there's a lot of solar potential. And so your hydro is your base load and your solar is your variable. And you can do a lot there. And we're already seeing that happen. And with Bitcoin is making that happen because you know what the biggest problem is? You want to know why there's energy poverty in the global south? Is because the Western world, white people don't want to invest in that part of the world because they're racists. And they've historically been pretty racist because of colonialism. And that's all it is. It's racist historical colonialism. That's the fallout. And there's not a willingness to take a risk on countries that have been completely extracted and exploited for their resources. And what they need is a lot more front-end investment into these power resources. And it's hard to get that in the global south. But with Bitcoin, we're actually seeing that change. Because now we're seeing these micro hydropower plants coming online, like in Kenya, for example. And that's all because they're able to monetize that with Bitcoin mining. Right? And we have something called the Sun Exchange in South Africa that is monetizing the ability to build out solar panels, and they've been doing that since 2015. And the founder, the CEO of Sun Exchange, he's a British guy who had been in energy for quite a number of years here in the UK, and moved there and discovered that there was not a single solar panel on a roof in South Africa. And so he realized, in order to do what I want to do, I need a monetary something where I can denominate the dividends to the investors, to these micro investors, so that it could be even like a fraction of a cent. And the only way you could do that was with Bitcoin. So what happens is that anyone in the world can invest in a solar project in South Africa. And it can be from anything like putting solar panels on a church or an elementary school. And then I could just buy one panel, and now I'm an investor. And then I get a dividend back from that investment in Bitcoin. And if I just leave it there, and they're just, holding my Bitcoin, and I forget about it, I come back in a couple of years and I see, oh wow, the value of this Bitcoin has gone up. Well, what they found out is that people are not taking that Bitcoin off of the Sun Exchange. They're actually reinvesting it and buying more solar panels. So now you've incentivized more investment and more solar to be built in South Africa because of Bitcoin as being part of that whole concept, that whole business model. And so that is allowing people to leapfrog technology so they don't even have to rely on fossil fuels. Because where are those countries going to get that fossil fuel from anyway? Now you're increasing demand on fossil fuels when we already have a problem like in Germany, where they also don't have their own fossil fuel resources, and they were dependent on Russia, and they knew in 2009 that they needed to become less dependent on other countries. They knew, and they didn't. And now they're in trouble. And they did some steps in the wrong direction, in the wrong order with their energy transition by shutting down nuclear plants too early, right? And then they got rid of some of the subsidies that they had with the renewable energy that they were developing, which was partly because it was happening too fast. And it was actually bankrupting some of the other energy companies, like long-standing energy companies in the country. And if they had Bitcoin mining then they could have co-located that, right? And then they could have been able to help keep those new plants alive, right? There's so many things here that are happening that make this complex. But the point is that we cannot rely on fossil fuels to bring people out of poverty. We have to be creative because we are living through a situation right now that is serious, and it is an emergency, And we are putting too many emissions into the atmosphere, too many greenhouse gas emissions. And if we continue to do that, the people that are currently energy impoverished will also be, starving. They will have no water. It's going to be very dire. There's already horrible famines that have gone on in the Horn of Africa, Madagascar, right? It's bad. It's already bad. So we need to really listen to the people from the global south and listen to what they're saying about what they need. And I don't think that what they're saying is we need the West to burn more fossil fuels. What they're saying is the West needs to stop burning more fossil fuels.
Sorry,
Yeah.
It's not exactly right what you're saying. I think that I'm from Ghana.
Oh, okay.
And I'm really interested very much in Black people, African people, Caribbean people, really waking up to what the story of our lives, the history of slavery and colonizations, on what it has done to Africa and the Caribbean and other countries like that, now to do with climate and global warming. But a lot of African people just don't want to hear about this because as far as they're concerned, we've been limping along for, hundreds of years. And now with globalization and, internet and all this stuff, it's African people's time, to get on this trajectory of growth at all costs. And that hurts me so much, But what you're saying, actually, I really want to find out more, because I think that in places like countries like Africa, not the very poorest, but the sort of people who are not exactly middle income even, but the Uber drivers and stuff like that. I think that you can reach them. I think you could cause a revolution, create a revolution in places like that, because they grasp this very quick. They're not all plugged into banks and God knows what, like we are here. So it's like, they're freer because they don't have that much, So they already all use their phones to pay for things. And they're not even paying for things through their banks, but through other networks that they pay money into in order to use their phones.
The revolution is going to happen.
Yeah,
it's starting.
And it's there.
They're ready
it's there
for it.
that it can happen. Not
It
so
will
much.
happen there.
It's
Not
already,
so much here.
but it's starting. What you're saying is, these things are starting to happen. There was a project where people are going to be able to send Bitcoin over their phones to compete with M-Pesa. And then, for example, Anita Posh, she's really, really interesting. She's an Austrian, but she works a lot on the African continent. And she works with communities there, explaining Bitcoin and getting them involved, and things are really taking off there. She has a podcast, she does interviews with people, and it's exactly like what you're saying. People get it very quickly in this region, and so I think that these are the regions, these are the parts of the world where we're really going to see Bitcoin take off. Was it Nigeria where they had the big protests? Yeah. So, the Bitcoin was a big part of these protests there. I think what you're saying is exactly you've completely got it now, because that is where we're seeing it. And there's gonna is the African conference, is that going to be in Ghana? Yeah. So the first Bitcoin conference on the continent is going to be in Ghana. So it's happening. It's happening.
I think we've probably.
It's 9.
Margot's going to be around to have a chat with the two, but I think I just want to thank Margot. Obviously, Margot's still trying to fund her PhD, so we have some QR codes around. So I think we haven't paid Margot; she's done this out of the good of herself. So if everyone is willing to just send her some sats, support the cause, she's been amazing. She's given us a lot of her time. So yeah, big thank you to Margot. Thank you for coming.